welcome. I'm glad everyone is here today for our talk about a vitamin that's really a hormone. Many of you have texted me or guessed, or maybe we've had this conversation in the practice before about this very special vitamin. And so I'm excited that we'll be able to go through some of the details about it so that you can use this information to help yourself be healthier. I'm actually going to share my screen first here. Just give me a moment to get that started. My challenges in the sunlight is actually seeing my cursor. There we go. Okay, so we're going to talk today about the vitamin that's really the hormone. And many of you know, because we've had this conversation before, that one of the most important things that we can do is have a vitamin D level in our body that's functional and effective and helping us promote health. We're going to talk about why that is and a little bit of the science behind this vitamin. What is vitamin D? You know, initially, vitamin D was thought to be a vitamin. It is a fat-soluble molecule that our body's fat cells take up and store for later use. It actually lasts in our system. The half-life of this substance is about 2 months. So if I had a huge shot of vitamin D right now, it would last about 2 months before it was less than 50% left in my system. And there's two kinds of vitamin D. There's vitamin D3, which is really the form that I seek out when I'm buying a supplement or when I'm drawing blood or when I'm talking about vitamin D. I'm almost always meaning vitamin D3. It's the active form. It's cholecalciferol. There is a form called vitamin D2 that is less available inside our bodies. And the crazy thing is that a lot of supplements, if you start reading the labels on your supplement bottles, which I highly endorse doing, you may notice that a lot of supplement companies use vitamin D2 in some of the less quality or less aggressively stringent on their quality companies. They'll often use D2 as the form. And in fact, when I order a prescription of vitamin D in really super high doses, like 50,000 units, it's often D2 that's available in that concentration. But if we can get vitamin D3, all the better. It's really the more active form and is going to be more available in your system to then be converted to all of the metabolites and all the activities that vitamin D is supposed to do. So this question of whether it's a vitamin or a hormone, in all honesty, it in some ways doesn't matter, except to say that initially, vitamin D was labeled as a vitamin because it was thought that it only was obtained from our diet. And so it was kind of a historical accident that it got labeled as a vitamin, because a vitamin is an essential item that we have to get in our diet in order to get it. Whereas a hormone is an item that our body makes. And in this case, vitamin D actually gets created in our body, and we're going to talk about that. But in essence, the difference is that a vitamin is something you can only obtain from either your food or things you ingest, and a hormone is something that your own body creates. And as you'll see, vitamin D kind of is both, honestly, but for sure it fits the classification of a hormone. And honestly, typically, hormones are things that are all the more essential to life. Like, you can't live without those hormones, and that's why the body, sort of in its own like safety mechanisms, has made itself able, or it's been created to be able to produce those items so that we would never be fully lacking. So what does vitamin D do? Well, you know, if I ask that question, like right here on the corner in Isla Vista, it really would mainly be thought to be around bone formation. Ask every woman who's after menopause, and they know that they ought to be taking calcium and vitamin D. We've done a pretty good job at putting that message out there, and it's true that vitamin D is really important about bone formation. Vitamin D helps really keep the calcium where it's supposed to be in our body, and is incredibly important in keeping bones strong. To the degree that now I almost always recommend taking vitamin D, but I don't always recommend taking calcium because so many people's diets are actually adequate in calcium, but definitely not adequate in vitamin D. Proper brain, heart, muscle, immune system, and skin function is imperative. It is imperative that we have vitamin D for those functions to be normal. A little more on this, I'll just mention, we're learning that Alzheimer's, for instance, is directly impacted by a lack of vitamin D. Heart disease is absolutely increased in people who have deficiencies of vitamin D. Muscle tone and muscle strength is impacted by vitamin D levels, and our immune system is drastically impacted by vitamin D. Within that immune function includes our body being able to sort of manage, for instance, all of the mutations that come along. So we think that our body is constantly fighting off mutations that could turn into cancer, but because our immune system is on patrol, it's really, working to our advantage to keep us from ever developing those diseases. But without vitamin D, it can't do that very well. So when we are deficient in vitamin D, and I'll go into what that means as far as how do you know if you're deficient or not. Deficiencies are associated with increased cancer rates and certainly with more autoimmune disorders because of that immunity function of vitamin D. And then heart and brain disorders are also increased when there's a deficiency of vitamin D. So how do we get vitamin D? This kind of goes into that question of being both a vitamin and a hormone. Really, skin exposure to UVB sunlight is our major source of vitamin D. It's the primary way we were made and built as human beings to obtain vitamin D, was to have this synergistic effect with the earth and the sun and be able to make vitamin D in our skin. There are numerous side mechanisms, side reactions that occur during the making of vitamin D in our skin. For instance, the making of vitamin D in our skin has a very specific impact on our cholesterol metabolism and makes cholesterol more water soluble. So when we stop having sun exposure or we stop the creation of vitamin D in our skin, we literally start to put this domino effect down about like 5 different pathways in our body that eventually cause dysfunction because of a lack of vitamin D. So here's kind of what's incredible. I'm sitting in the sun. I don't have my whole body exposed here because I'm at Starbucks, but I'm sitting in the sun right now. My arms are exposed, my face is exposed. And with whole body exposure, so like in general, those were people that had like a swimsuit on type of a thing. So whole body exposure for 15 to 20 minutes can allow our body to make about 10,000 units of vitamin D. So I will be sitting out here in the sun for about an hour with not whole body exposure, but I would expect that I'm going to be able to make between 3,000 and 5,000 units of vitamin D from this hour of time with my arms exposed and my face exposed out in the sun. This dose, as far as like how long should you sit in the sun with your whole body exposed or just your swimsuit on if you were trying to make 10,000 units, that dose is called the MED, which stands for minimal erythema dose. And what that means is enough sun on your skin that you would be very lightly pink 24 hours after exposure. So it's sort of like up to the edge of a sunburn, but not a sunburn, would be the amount of exposure that is deemed enough to actually make that 10,000 units of vitamin D. Many people worry about sun exposure, and in these amounts, sun exposure is not harmful. Another topic for another day is really how we've been led astray on the whole sun exposure and skin cancer story. We are certainly all encouraged by skin specialists in this country to use sunscreen and to avoid sun exposure, and we have done ourselves harm by doing that. I'm not advocating getting sunburned, and I'm not advocating if you're a golfer and you're going to be out on the course for 6 hours, I'm not advocating that you not cover your skin. But in essence, 15 to 20 minutes of sun exposure is not something that's harmful. And in fact, if you're on either really good antioxidants that help the skin prevent any damage from UVB sunlight, or if you are limiting your time in the sun to these amounts that do not cause sunburn, you actually really can benefit from the sun rather than cause harm. So just a little plug there for sun exposure on our skin. And I'll be happy to talk about that more another time, or to you personally as a member. Also, I want to look at diet as a source of vitamin D. And in many ways, although these foods have vitamin D in them, they're not the major source of our vitamin D in our diet. In many ways, this list of like cod liver oil and cheeses and some of the fatty fishes and beef liver, those foods definitely have vitamin D in them. The number one food of that list is really egg yolks. And it's one of the big reasons that I highly recommend, if you eat eggs, eat the whole egg. Don't skip the yolk unless you have a specific food sensitivity to it. There's nothing that's going to harm you from the egg yolk. It used to be, certainly when I was a kid, we were told we needed to not eat eggs all the time, and eggs are now out of the doghouse. They are absolutely not thought to raise cholesterol, and unless you've had a proven reason, I know that some of us have done different experimentation with our diet and tried certain things, and if you've had problems with egg yolks, don't eat them, but otherwise they're a really good source of vitamin D. However, even if you ate egg yolks every day, you still would benefit from sun exposure making vitamin D in your skin because of all of the other mechanisms that process of creating vitamin D starts to impact and help us from the standpoint of preventive health. And then supplements, I mentioned that there's vitamin D2 and vitamin D3, and that vitamin D3 would be preferable. Your body will convert D2 into D3, but if you get a vitamin supplement and you're paying for it, you might as well go ahead and get the one that's more available, which would be the vitamin D3. So location matters for making vitamin D. So if you live in Hawaii or in Southern California, you are lucky because the latitude and longitude where we live gives us more maximal hours year-round that we can create vitamin D in our skin. So in our desert, and actually below Bakersfield in California, we can make vitamin D from being out in the sun between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. So people that come into my office, I will tell you that sort of as an informal poll, or me looking back at all of my records in my office, more than 50% of my patients are deficient in vitamin D. And they are shocked when we find that out because they say, gosh, I live in the desert, I walk my dogs, I'm in and out of my car. Why am I deficient in vitamin D? Something's wrong with this picture. And in actuality, it really kind of makes sense if you think about the changes in our lifestyle as a society. We used to be outdoors working in a garden or maybe doing manual labor much of the time, and we didn't have the conveniences that we have now, and maybe not even the daily schedules that we have. When you think about a work day in many people's minds being from 8 to 5, the only time then for leisure activities like walking your dog or like exercising outside or laying in the sun is going to be outside of your work hours or on the weekend. So number one, we all tend to now be indoors between 8 and 5 in most cases if you're in the working time of your life. And if you're not, we've been so careful about avoiding long-term sun exposure that many people are not allowing 20 minutes of sun exposure each day. So in our desert, if you walk your dog at 6 in the morning, you will not be able to make vitamin D from that sun exposure. But if it's sometime between 10 and 4, you would be able to. And in many locations, particularly if you start to get further north than Bakersfield and this latitude and longitude of where we're at in Southern California, you may only be able to get the right angle of the sun to create vitamin D production in certain months of the year because of the winter and the winter solstice. So between May and October, you might be able to make vitamin D if you lived, let's say, in Minnesota or Canada, but other times of the year, you probably would not be able to make vitamin D. The one other little trick, it's posted somewhere on our website, was a post with a picture of me taking a picture of my shadow. And the reason I did that is I think it's fascinating that one of the easiest ways to know if you're at a place where the angle of the sun to where you are is such that you can make vitamin D, the easiest way to know is to look at how long your shadow is when you're standing in the sun. If your shadow is longer than your height, then you're not making vitamin D. If your shadow is shorter than your height, you can make vitamin D at that time with any exposed skin. So that's one easy hack to get around, like, how do I know if I can make vitamin D or not right now? So what stops us from making vitamin D? What are some of the issues that we want to think about? I mentioned the northern latitudes and the winter seasons. That's one issue. Sunblock, we also mentioned. So if your sunblock has an SPF of more than 15, that will block 100% of your vitamin D production. So that would be one thing to consider. So if you're going to apply sunblock, although as a parent, I always tried to put it on before we went to the beach because you know what it's like to put sunblock on a sandy kid. But if you have the option to allow yourself your 15 to 20 minutes of sun exposure and then apply your sunblock, that would be a much better tactic just as far as promoting vitamin D production. Also, people with darker skin pigments are more protected. Sorry about the person driving by. So people with darker skin pigments are more protected from the sun exposure and the UVB rays, and that means they may have to be in the sun longer in order to get the equivalent vitamin D protection. Also, statin drugs are very known for disrupting the pathway of how we make vitamin D in the skin. So if you are on a cholesterol medication in the category of the statins, you are no longer able to make vitamin D from the skin and sun, and you're going to end up probably needing to do some significant supplementation in order to get your blood levels up to a supportive level. Air pollution does impact how well the sun's rays get to us, sometimes increasing them and sometimes decreasing them. And then thin skin actually has less capacity to make vitamin D. In some ways, in a rough way, if you think of this, it's kind of like if you have less fatty layers protecting you under your skin and your skin is thinning, there's less ability to make vitamin D and less place to store it close to the skin. So as we age, we tend to make vitamin D less than we do when we are younger. So this page has so much information on it because it's about what happens at different blood levels of vitamin D. And so I'm going to put the name of the vitamin D test to request up on a future slide here. But these are the levels of 25 hydroxyvitamin D. So the way you can ask for that from the doctor, and it'll be on a subsequent slide so you can write it down if you wish, is 25 OH-vitamin D. That's the level of vitamin D that's your active form of vitamin D circulating in the body. And here's what happens with those blood levels. So if you have a vitamin D level that's less than 10 nanograms per milliliter, you would be called severely deficient. And you have a risk not only of rickets, but if that level is less than 20, your risk of cancer is about 75% increased over somebody who has a level that's above 20. So in that range, it totally makes sense to call that severely deficient and say, okay, this is not all right. We want to bring this level up into a range that's more safe for the person. If the level is less than 30, then it's called deficient. And in some ways, this is based on the fact that the United States recommended daily allowances and guidance on blood levels for vitamin D states that a level between 30 and 100 is normal. And I like to say it's really great to be normal, but all of us want to be above average. All of us want to be excellent or optimal or extraordinary. And so I'm not willing for us to just be normal or average, which a level of 30, I would tell you, would be very average as far as it is what people have in our society, but it is not good for you to be at a level of 30. Below 30, we know that there's increased calcium loss from your bones, so there's more osteoporosis. Wounds don't heal well. There's muscle and joint and back pain that's increased in deficiency of vitamin D. Depression, diabetes, migraines, autoimmune diseases, allergies, and inflammation are all increased if your level of vitamin D is less than 30. And I would say probably, oh gosh, at least a third of my patients, maybe even half, have a blood level between 30 and 50 nanograms of vitamin D. And here are the risks at those levels. If the level is less than 34, we know there's twice the risk of a heart attack. If the level is less than 36, we know that there's almost always increased high blood pressure eventually in those patients. And if the level is less than 40, in multiple sclerosis statistics, there's 3 times the risk of developing multiple sclerosis if your blood level of vitamin D is less than 40. So let's talk about some of the optimal levels. We call it optimal if the levels are between 50 and 80. And I would actually say even between 80 and 100, I would still call it optimal. In other words, you certainly are adequate and don't need more if that level is above 80, but it's not going to harm you to have a level in that range. So between 50 and 80 nanograms per milliliter is optimal, and we know that if there's a blood level of vitamin D that's over 50, there's a 50% reduction in breast cancer incidence. So that right there, guys, that's huge when we think about it. Like, why wouldn't we do this? This is so easy, just by taking our vitamin D and or getting some sun exposure. So reducing breast cancer risk in women is absolutely something that, you know, every one of us is about. We want to do that, but this is a very simple way to do that. The other thing that we know is that maintaining blood levels of vitamin D between 80 and 100 nanograms per milliliter actually slows cancer growth in actually diagnosed patients with cancer. So another thing, even if you already have cancer, we would want to optimize this blood level because it'll slow cancer growth. If the blood levels are above 100, we start to have a little bit of caution. And there are some doctors that are naturopathic type doctors or alternative docs that want this level up to 120. The question becomes, after 100, there is certainly the possibility of having too much calcium in your blood because vitamin D helps protect and manage the calcium levels in the body. And so if you have too much vitamin D, you can end up with too much calcium in your system, and there are some people that that's more dangerous for than others. So, you know, if you have any other diagnoses and you have a high vitamin D level, there's a chance that your calcium levels could go high. That's easily checked with a blood test of your calcium, and so not a hard thing to do, but it's not where I drive to try to get the levels above 100. It's just that if they drift up there, we then sort of check the calcium and then lower the blood level of the vitamin D by decreasing the supplement or the methods that the person's using to get vitamin D. So the recommended dose, like how much vitamin D should you take, really depends on your blood levels. So I highly recommend that if you're not my patient, that you ask your doctor to do a 25 OH vitamin D. This is something that is done with our members in Exo Health just because it's good measure to do it. This and an insulin level, for instance, are things that every person gets drawn because they're so important to overall health. So the dose depends on your blood levels. So if you are in that severely deficient level, you need to be taking 10,000 or more units a day. I will sometimes use even higher doses than that for a short period of time and then drop back down to the 10,000 units a day. If your blood level was between 10 and 20, you still need the 10,000 units a day. If it's between 20 and 30, we can sometimes start to back down a little bit on your daily supplements to something like 8,000 units per day. I will tell you, because of the way that vitamin D is packaged, a lot of times it'll come in either 2,000, well, it comes in 400, 1,000, 2,000, and 5,000 increments a lot of times. And so taking 8,000 units a day can sometimes be a hassle for people to figure out, depending on how they're taking their supplement. So there's no harm in taking the 10,000 units a day if you're running a level that's under 30 in your blood, and then eventually retesting and dropping it back to a lower dose after you get your vitamin D level up to where you would like it. If your blood level is between 30 and 40, then taking 5,000 units a day is absolutely appropriate. And if it's between 40 and 50, 2,000 units a day is reasonable. And I often will still keep it at 5,000 units a day until the person really achieves a blood level that's above 60, and then drop it down to something that's a maintenance dose. But on 5,000 units a day, you're not going to get into trouble. Certainly on numbers less than that, you would not ever get into a toxicity situation. You just might not be getting enough to get the benefits of the vitamin D in your body at those levels where we want it, somewhere between 60 and 100. One other thing about these levels, you know, when people come to me, and as a member at Exo Health, we're looking at cholesterol and how to keep it in the normal range, for instance, and I use vitamin D as one of our main tactics to do that. It's a great way to have many, many benefits from something that also lowers cholesterol. So when I do that, however, I'm adjusting the amount of vitamin D I want the person to take based on their blood level for the goal of getting their blood level of vitamin D well above 60. So in my office, having a blood level above 60 is considered where we would like to aim for a person's vitamin D. So what should you ask for if you are going to go into the office and ask about a blood test? It would be called the 25-OH vitamin D blood test. Everybody should have that test yearly. And if you were going to take a supplement to change that blood level, then it's recommended that you would have your blood levels checked again 1 or 2 months after you started your new supplement or made an adjustment in the supplement. Just this last week, I saw a patient who had increased her dose. She had doubled it, and we were checking 8 weeks after, and she still had a blood level that was about 40. So we're not where we need to be yet. So in these cases where we're trying to really drive towards optimal, we're trying to achieve a level that allows for optimal health and allows your body to do its best healing. We want to check to see if the change we made was actually doing what we want it to. And so that recheck is helpful. The last slide I have just is available so that you know, and I remind myself also to tell you that this is a list of references about vitamin D. So if you're somebody who wants to read more or is interested in looking at all of the information about vitamin D that you can find, just know that we have that. And so for our members, there's copies of that in our office that you'd be able to get, or we can help you with that. But I'm going to actually stop sharing my screen so that I can come back to seeing if someone's asking a question, just so we have a few minutes for questions here at the end. Okay. We are back with me just being able to see your names on the screen. And if you have a question, feel free to move your cursor down to the lower left of your screen and unmute yourself. And I'll be able to hear you and then answer a question if you're interested in talking about a specific aspect of our presentation today. One of the happy finds in our office actually was that one of our patients brought in a type of vitamin D that was a chewable vitamin that has become our biggest favorite. Kirsten and I take it every day, and here's why. It has 5,000 units of high quality vitamin D3 in it, but it also tastes like chocolate. It's chewable. So literally I'm like, I forgot mine yesterday. I get to take 2 today. So that's the nice thing with vitamin D, because it's fat soluble. It is one of the only vitamins you can do this, but you can take your missed doses. So if you forgot to take it several days this week, you can take those doses all at once. And that's the only vitamin or medication I would tell you to do that with. You can't play catch up with other things, but you can with vitamin D. There's one question that's come in the chat box. Let me just see. So the question is, if you're taking 5,000 international units, but your level for over a year has been 57 or 58, should you add more? Yeah, I would. Now, here's a rule of thumb I use, and that is that each 1,000 units is going to raise your blood level about 7 points. So if you doubled your vitamin D from 5,000 to 10,000, it's probably going to raise it about another 35 points, and you're starting out just under 60, so it might raise it to 90, 95 if you doubled your vitamin D from a 5,000 to a 10,000, which is still not bad. And in fact, I don't know, there's a human nature aspect of this, and that is that I don't expect most people to be 100% perfect in taking their vitamins. Now, if I'm wrong and you're a super compulsive person and you know that over the past year you've missed vitamins maybe, 1 day a month, then don't do what I'm going to tell you right now. But in this case, for me, I'm a little bit sporadic. There are days that I forget to take my vitamins. So I probably hit, more like 4 or 5 days a week when I'm really on it, instead of 7 days a week. So in my case, I would just double that 5,000 and take 10,000 a day, and then make sure that I had my blood checked in something like 3 months or even 6 months to see where I was now kind of averaging out. If you do take your vitamins every day, maybe an ideal, instead of doubling it to 10,000, moving it from 5,000 up to 7,000 or 8,000 would be about right, I would say. So when you come into Exo Health, this is very easy to ask me about. It's something I'm looking at in your paperwork and in your blood work. Every time I have done annual labs for my patients, this is something I'm doing in the background, and don't always talk about it if we've had the conversation before, or you know, it's something I'll point out that the level is good, or the level is at a level that I would like to have you increase it for health benefits, and then give you a piece of advice on like how much to move it up, like we've done now, let's say. Are there any other questions? Well, I am thinking if there's not any other questions, I'm just going to give us another moment here, because sometimes it takes people a moment to unmute themselves. Again, if you're trying to unmute yourself, there's a little microphone in the bottom left of your screen that says mute or unmute, and you can click unmute if you actually want to ask a question, or you can type it into the chat box that's down at the bottom of the screen as well. But I will say this has been actually a lovely place to hold our webinar. I'm sitting outside and have enjoyed the sun and beautiful environment. And I hope each of you has a great day. If you have the option and you can get outside this afternoon and get 15 to 20 minutes of sun, go for it. That would be great. And I look forward to seeing you next week. Again, next week it'll be at 12:10 that we would meet for this webinar. And next week it's a topic about the 6 types of Alzheimer's. So I look forward to seeing you each then, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you for being part of our discussion today, and I hope you go create extraordinary health and extraordinary things in your life. If you need the office phone number, I'll just say it again, and in fact, I may be able to even type it here, but I think many of you have it. But our office phone number is 760-573-2761. And we'd be happy to take a call from you if you have an interest in getting in and checking on your own health. Thank you, and have an awesome, awesome rest of your day. Take care. Bye-bye.